We're in John chapter 3 today, continuing our story, just checking to see if you're paying attention. Mike gave me a really strange look. Where are we? Acts 27. And what's going on? There's a big storm, right? So I thought I would help you. Close that so that we don't have to put up with it the whole time. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of what that might be like for these folks. So I'm going to pick it back up in 13 and read on down to about verse 20, I think it is. Yeah. Just to kind of pick up, recap where we left off. Now, when the south wind blew gently, when 13 starts, they're on what island? They're on Crete, right? Supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land, and when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Wow. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you despaired for life itself. I can't recall that I have been in that situation before. And the closest I ever came to anything like this was I had to charter a plane on short notice to fly across the Atlantic, part of the Atlantic, off the east coast of the U.S. during a thunderstorm in like a 6-seater charter plane. That was not exciting. Lightning all around, big storm, it's kind of frightening. But the pilot seemed at ease and seemed to know what he was doing, and we got through just fine. I don't know if you ever watch the show with Creek Stewart. You ever watch that? Could You Get Out of This Alive, or whatever the name of that story is on the Weather Channel? Don't mean to be giving advertisements here, but it's a really interesting story about people that get caught in some really dangerous, difficult circumstances and how they get out of those circumstances. And this one guy, yesterday, I just happened to be watching it. He was walking down a creek in Zion Park in apparently very early spring. So the air temperature was like 42, the water temperature was 38. He and his girlfriend were hiking. She got stuck in quicksand in the middle of the river. He got her out, and he got stuck, and he couldn't get unstuck. So she had to go for help. He despairs of life itself. In fact, they had him narrating this, and he really thought he was not going to make it. He was losing all feeling in his lower extremities. He couldn't move at all. He was leaning on a stick to keep from going underwater. It was just a really dangerous circumstance. And I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you despaired of life itself, but that's the mentality. That's what these people are going through right now in this story. This storm's been going on. We saw that they could not, let's see here, let me back up. Yeah, 20, we talked about this in 20, where when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, so they don't even know where they are. They literally don't know which way's north, which way's west. They can't see any, there's nothing to orient themselves. It's just dark, stormy skies over them. And they're lost and know they're getting blown around and kind of expect to run aground at just at any time. So they're pretty afraid. So they're in 18. We looked at that last week. What did they do? 18, they started to jettison the cargo, right? So we learned later in this chapter it's wheat. They started throwing wheat overboard, getting rid of it so that they are more buoyant. On the third day, what did they do? Threw the tackle overboard. Now, it's kind of interesting to keep track of the days. This is the third day of the storm. They throw the ship's tackle overboard. That's kind of like saying, and again, I'm not a sailor, but that seems to me that that's saying we've lost hope of using the ship to save us. Our guidance and our control of the ship is gone. We might as well not even keep this extra weight on board. Let's get rid of all the ship's tackle. And they threw the ship's tackle overboard. So they have no way to control the ship any longer.
It also says in 17 that they passed ropes under the ship to hold it together.
Yeah.
They're basically tying
Yeah.
to hold what they're in together to keep it from breaking apart.
Which, you know, just that little statement right there, that seems like a pretty amazing feat to me.
It really does.
The storm's jostling the ship around, and they somehow managed to pass a rope underneath the ship. And
Would you just go up to the bow and drop it on each side and then walk your way
now,
back?
see, you would have thought of that. I'd have been running around going, what do we do? What do we do? Yeah.
Wow.
I want Linda on board when we get shipwrecked. So we talked about what caused them to despair. No navigation, no control, no sign of it letting up. And it's just really tearing into them. Let's continue the story in 21. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and have not set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no..." Now I'm reading this in a speaking voice. What kind of a voice is Paul using? He's shouting over the storm, right? Maybe I should try that a little bit. Let's pick it up in 21. "Men, you should have listened to me and not set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship, and he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, man, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island.'" Okay, so we know the state of those on board from 21. What kind of shape are they in? Haven't eaten anything. No food. How well do you hold up to stress if you haven't had anything to eat? Not well.
I doubt they're sleeping very much either.
Probably not. I mean, how would you sleep, right? The ship's rolling back and forth and being tossed. Incredible noise. Why do you think Paul said, "You should have listened to me" in verse 21? Do you think this was a, "Na, na, 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 you should listen to me"? You think it's that kind of a tone? Ellen says no.
He's making a little more angry.
Maybe angry?
He's making a point, because he's gonna tell him in just a minute that God's gonna
Yeah.
come and help him.
Yeah. You should have listened to me. But let me tell you what God just did. And yeah, so there's maybe he's angry. Maybe it's this tone that, you know, you made a bad choice, but let me tell you about what God's going to do. And there's some comfort there. When you read this, it would be easy to maybe read into it that he's kind of going, well, you should have listened to me, you know. But I don't think it was that tone at all. For one thing, that doesn't really fit Paul's character, does it? He's not that kind of a person. What does he tell them in 22?
You're gonna survive.
There's going to be no loss of life, but only the ship. Which, I don't know, if I'm one of those people, I'm going, good news, bad news, you know? I'm not going to die, but the ship's going to bust apart. I mean, what are you saying? I guess I would take some assurance that I don't necessarily know God, right? So I'm sorry, there's another thought here.
I think he reminded them, you should have listened to me the first time, to remind them that, hey, God's, you know, I've been talking to God. I've got some faith here.
Yes.
This angel told me, and so maybe you need to listen to me now.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to have some faith that this is.
So we do see that there's this, we mentioned this, I think last week, maybe the week before, that as we go through 27, you'll see this play off between some of the pagan beliefs and what God accomplishes. And so this is one of those contrasts, like Vicky's pointing out, that Paul says, listen to what God's going to do. So yeah, pretty interesting how that contrast happens, and we'll see more of that as we go even into 28. So he tells them in 22, they're not going to lose their lives, only the ship. What vision does he share in 23 and 24? What's he tell them?
Angel of God came down and stood beside him
Yeah, so when did that happen?
last night.
This very night, it says, right? For this very night there stood before me an angel of God to whom I belong. Of the God to whom I belong. So actually he says it, I stumble with it every time I read that. Of the God to whom I belong, right? So your pagan deities aren't doing you much good right now. Let me tell you about the God that I belong to. And he shares this vision. And he says, do not be afraid, Paul, you must stand before Caesar. So this is something that's going to happen. When God says something's going to happen, one way or another, it's going to happen. And Paul is, we remember, you know, clear back when he was at Caesarea, he was told then that he must appear before Caesar in Rome. And that's reiterated here, that he's going to appear before Caesar. So what does he say is about to happen in 25 and 26? You're going to run aground. Have faith that it's going to happen, like Vicki said. Have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. Doesn't really tell them much beyond that, but that they're going to run aground. So they're at least somewhat mentally prepared for what's about to happen. Still pretty scary, but they have at least some assurance from Paul, and hopefully there's a good number of them that are believing and trusting what Paul is telling them, even though they may not fully know or understand God. What kind of ship is this again? From where? It's from Alexandria, right? So it's from northern Egypt. So we don't know how many even Jewish believers were on here, much less Christians. And we'll see in 28 where there's more pagan connections as we get into the story. Okay, let's read 27 through 32.
Before you do that, I
Yes.
like this phrase in King James Version. I didn't hear you read the phrase there, so he says, "Be of good cheer."
Be of good cheer.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
kind of reminded me of what Christ told his disciples when they were at in the ship with the big storm, and he was sleeping, and they woke him up and said, "Lord, we're drowning, we're going to die," you know. And he says, "Well, where's your faith? You
Yeah.
know, use it, have a little faith." And then he just said, "Peace, be still," and the sea calm. I mean, God has great powers, but sometimes we forget them when we lose our cheer, we lose our joy.
Yes.
But
Yes.
these people were not Christians, but he says, "Be of good cheer."
Be of good cheer. So that's King James says, be of good cheer. What does anybody else have?
Take heart.
Take heart. Take heart. The same kind of thinking. Look up, right? Don't be so full of despair, which is kind of where their heart is right now. So he's trying to pull them out of this despair that they're feeling. Okay, 27. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men," wrong spot, 27. When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took the sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little farther on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, use that voice, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes from the ship's boat and let it go. Wow. So 14th night. They've been out there. The storm's been blowing how long? 2 weeks. 14 days the storm's been blowing. We saw day 3. We don't have a whole lot of day 4 through day 14. But apparently more the same, because it says when the 14th night had come, and as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea. Now this one kind of messed with me a little bit because I looked at the map, right? So in today's maps, where they were is the Western Mediterranean. But back then, they referred to that whole area as the Adriatic Sea. If you look at your map, should we look at the map? Let me go back. Get a good picture of that map. There we go. So they got blown off. They were afraid they were going to get blown down this way. They're getting tossed around. And today we would call this the Western Mediterranean. Here's the Ionian Sea, and here's the Adriatic Sea. But this whole area, and the Ionian Sea was considered part of the Adriatic Sea. In ancient times, this was just the Adriatic. So it's still an accurate account. It's just the way that people perceived and understood the area of the seas that they were in at that time. Yes, Don?
In the King James, it said they were driven down in a
Adria. Yeah. Yeah. I thought maybe, maybe Ionian Sea is maybe a newer term, a newer navigation term, or a newer geographical name for that area. But when I looked that up, the Ionian Sea was named, BC. It was a long time ago that the Ionian Sea was named. But apparently that whole area was considered the Adriatic. So let's get back where we were. Oh, there we go. So what did the crew suspect there from 27? What?
Well,
So we know that they're waiting for daytime to appear, so it's night, right? So what would be your clue if you can't see anything? What would be your clue that you're nearing land?
Epicenter.
Well, that would be one way. That's what they did, but it said they suspected it and then took the soundings. What would cause you to suspect you're nearing land?
You hear the water breaking on the shore.
You hear the water breaking, thank you. It's noisy, but you're hearing something that you didn't hear before, and you're going, are those breakers? We better take a sounding. And so they take a sounding. A fathom is, pop quiz. A fathom is how many feet? 6 feet. So they're about 120 feet deep below them in water at that first sounding. Second sounding is less. How many feet was that? 90 feet. So they're approaching something that's shallower. So they took soundings. They had their best sonar on board.
Yeah.
How were they doing this? How were they taking a sounding?
Knotted card of the weight.
Sorry?
They had a knotted card and they dropped the weight down.
Very good. Yeah. So they had some sort of a cord, a rope, something that was flexible with a weight on the end of it, and that was marked, and they would lower it until it went slack, and then they could tell how deep it was. Which even then sounds like a pretty good accomplishment given the storm, right? So the storm's still pretty violent, and just getting that thing, the guy with the short straw gets to lean over the edge and do the sounding. I don't know how they did that, but somebody had to take that sounding. So they were afraid they were going to run aground, and what did they do in hopes of preventing running aground? Threw up how many? 4 anchors. Off what part of the ship?
Back.
Off the stern, right? So off the back of the ship, they throw off these anchors to kind of slow them down so they don't get smashed up against rocks and run aground. So they're hoping that this doesn't work, that they don't get knocked up on the shore. This is the shoreline of Malta. This is near Munxar Reef. You can see kind of the underwater reef that extends out quite a ways. This is St. Thomas Bay in Malta. A little bit of trivia, and I don't think George would mind. There used to be the director of lab here at the hospital. His name was George Vela, and George was from Malta. The only person I've ever known from Malta, but that's where George was from. He took a job at another lab at another hospital someplace, but always really liked George, and I always thought it was interesting that he was on that island. This is the northern shoreline of St. Thomas Bay in Malta. They don't really know exactly where where the ship wrecked, but it was someplace on Malta. As you can see, any of these kind of likely spots, right? I mean, you could see it happening on these rocky shorelines. Okay, verse 30. What did the sailors do, and why did they do it?
They let down the boat.
Let down the ship's boat, which we talked about a couple times ago. Steve was helping us with that too. It was kind of a utility boat, not really a lifeboat. They used it for lots of different things, including placing anchors. They might use it to help them in the harbor, to position the ship, use it for all kinds of different things. They just refer to it as the ship's boat. So what are they doing in verse 30? Planning an escape, yeah, with a pretense, right? So they said, yeah, we're going to go out there and set some anchors off the bow. And the pretense was that they're going to do that, but they were really, as it tells us in 30, under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow. They wanted to escape from the ship. And what Paul warned them, what did he say? You've got to stay in the ship. Yes, Don?
Some of the stuff I read, the floor anchor that they were getting ready to throw out was, they were little different types of anchors. The ones out the back were slow ship, they didn't actually catch and hold the bottom. The floor anchor was designed to do that, so it would hold the ship pointed into the wind.
Okay.
And then those ships, drag anchors, they could throw them out the slope.
Yeah, yeah. And then if you go online, and I saw some pictures that were included in the BiblePlaces.com collection, the photo companion for the Book of Acts that they have. And there were a few pictures of ancient anchors. They're kind of hard to come by, but there's a few of them around, and they look remarkably like anchors do today. They haven't changed a whole lot. There are some anchors nowadays that are a lot more modern and technical in how they function to, automatic release if they get jammed on something, that sort of thing. So Paul tells them they have to stay on the ship if you're going to survive. So what do they do with the ship's boat in 32? They let it go. They cut it loose. There it went. Not of any use to them at this point. Okay, let's continue on, 33. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they all were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. So how long have they been struggling without eating? 14 days. Now, I don't know about you. Well, I'm a little embarrassed, right? So I missed lunch. I'm complaining. They went 14 days without eating. What did Paul urge them to do? Eat. And oh, by the way, not one hair of your head is going to be lost. It's going to be okay. You need to eat. You need to get your strength up. What did Paul then do? 35. Took some bread, prayed for the bread, and he's having an impact on people for God in ways just through his everyday carrying on, right? So Paul prays before his meals. That's pretty apparent here. And he prays to God and thanks him for the bread and eats. And so what impact did this have on the rest of the group there in 36?
They were encouraged.
They were encouraged. And they ate some food themselves. And it says we were in all 276 persons in the ship. Now, you may have a footnote there. And I chased this for a little while because I want to make sure I'm sharing accurate information. Some translations may say 76 instead of 276. And the scholars are pretty unanimous on this, that was a scribe error, that some scribe someplace thought, wow, that's an awful lot of people. They surely could not have meant 276. I'm going to change that to 76. And they made a decision, the scribe did, to change that to 76. But the manuscripts, even the oldest manuscripts, show 276. And some additional material that I found said that Josephus records a ship of that era that had over 600 people on board. So, yeah, you can have a lot of people on one of these ships, one of these bigger ships. This was a cargo ship. So 276 people, they eat, and they take the rest of the wheat and throw it out into the sea, it says.
You know, Jeff, something that just occurred to me that I've read this a bunch of times and never really struck me. In 30, when it said the sailors were trying to get off, Paul told the soldiers, if they leave, we're done. We're all done. If you're going to run that ship aground at some point, which he said the ship's going to run aground, don't you think you might need a sailor or two to help you navigate that?
Yeah.
Or a soldier and a bunch of people that don't know squat about sailing? That was a self-preservation move by the soldiers. It's like, yeah, he said, you got to stay, but we can't handle this ship if it starts running aground. You guys are going to stay put
Yeah,
and help us, finish this journey. So they basically just made it impossible for the sailors to leave the ship, leaving a bunch of soldiers and a bunch of people that don't know how to sail back on there.
and Paul was aware of God's plan.
He sure did.
And Paul knew that God had intended to save everybody,
That's right.
and only the ship would be lost. So they were not going to be saved by their own hand, they're going to be saved by the hand of God. And Paul understood that. So yeah, it's interesting how this all plays out. I would kind of like to see the look on the face of those sailors that were on the little boat, like, oh, busted. Got to get back on board, which they did.
Also in verse 29, now mine says they prayed to daylight. I don't know what yours says. But they prayed there again.
And prayed for day to come, yes. Yeah. They wanted to see what was coming as best they could. And 33 says as day was about to dawn. So an interesting little sidelight here. So there's a couple places, and sometimes you hear people say, well, when the breaking bread means taking the Lord's Supper. Breaking bread means sharing a meal. That's because the bread was flat. If you wanted to share the bread, you took a piece and you passed it to somebody else and let them take off a piece of bread. And that was called breaking bread. And there's two places in the Bible that record breaking of bread and people sharing it that do not refer to the Lord's Supper. This is one of them. So this is a meal. They're getting their strength up. This is not the Lord's Supper. The other one is in Acts 2, I believe, where it talks about the fellowship of the believers. And it says they paid attention to the apostles' teaching, to the breaking of bread, and to prayers. That breaking of bread refers to the Lord's Supper because it's talking about these elements, if you will, of Christian life and worship. Then it also shares a little bit further in that passage, and you can go read it, that they went from home to home with glad and sincere hearts, breaking bread and fellowshipping with one another. That's a kind of a poor paraphrase. But they enjoyed meals together. And you see that phrase, breaking bread, again, not in the context of the Lord's Supper. So a couple places where that's mentioned, and I think it's always interesting to see how that term is used. I've seen it used just kind of in a Christian fellowship sort of way. Go to someone and say, hey, Jack, come over and break bread with us tonight. We're not talking about having the Lord's Supper. We're talking about sitting down and eating hot dogs or something. Just having a meal together. It's just a way of sharing a meal. What important lessons? Well, there's probably more than one. There was one that popped into my mind. Is there any important lessons we can learn from this incident of people eating and getting their strength up? Let me share one real quick. So, when I worked at a healthcare organization, I say it broadly like that, sometimes we would have pediatric cases, and the children, because they were the ones having some sort of a procedure, they were NPO, nothing by mouth. After midnight, you can't eat. It makes them an anesthesia risk if they have anything to eat, so they can't have anything to eat. Sometimes mom and dad, out of sympathy for the child, would not eat as well. Really bad idea. Because not only was the child weak and unable to deal with the situation, they were going to get anesthetized and go through the procedure anyway, so it was not a tremendous hardship for the child. But mom and dad were completely depleted because they've been running around getting everybody to the hospital that morning. They didn't have any energy left. And more than once, we had to find a bed for mom or dad because they would collapse or they would get woozy or something like that. I can remember when I went through EMT training, the toughest time, and you worked as a nurse for many years, the toughest time I had with graphic situations in the emergency room was when I had not eaten. I was depleted, I was tired, maybe at the end of my shift, I hadn't eaten, I was tired, and I was in a situation that was pretty graphic, and I didn't handle those well. I've learned that about myself. If I'm depleted, I'm not going to do well. I need my strength, so I need my rest, and I need a decent meal, and then I'm ready to take on the world. And I think there's an important lesson for us there. These people were trying to deal with this shift on a completely empty stomach. They hadn't eaten in 2 weeks. They weren't worth a plug nickel, and Paul knew that. Said, you have to eat. You need your strength. And I'm sure him eating and praying and encouraging them, saying, not a hair of your head is going to get lost. Eat some food. That encouraged them. And they needed that. Okay. I think that may have got me to the end of the lesson. No, a couple more slides here. So here's 2 bays on the northern side of Malta. They kind of give you an idea of what this might look like from the air. Here's what they call St. Paul's Bay in Malta. Again, a very rocky shoreline. Now there's more. It gets more exciting. And I don't think we're going to... I've got 2 minutes. Let's read. So now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bows stuck remained unmovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks or pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. Okay, when the day came, they saw what? They see land. They see a beach. What do they plan to do? Let's run this thing aground. Let's get it up on the beach. What did they do to accomplish their plan? What they cut loose? Cut the anchors loose. Let's just get going. Let's make it to the beach. So they cut the anchors loose. Instead of reaching the beach, what happened? They hit a reef. Yeah. They hit a reef. The bow of the ship was stuck. They're not going anywhere. What's happening to the ship in 41 as the surf's hitting the ship? It's breaking up. The ship is busting up from the force of the breakers on the back of the ship. And the ship's coming apart. What did the soldiers plan to do? Kill the prisoners. What happens to a Roman soldier if the prisoner in your charge escapes? You are killed. But Julius, this centurion, says, what? Don't do it. Don't do it. He tells them to jump, make for the shore. Let's pick it up here next week. I don't want to rush through the last part of this. We'll pick it up here. Thank you for your comments.
It just